All right, greedy capitalist swine. It's time to search the deep reaches of your mind. Welcome to episode 103 of the Scottish Liberty Podcast. We were scheduled to record yesterday, but we got the tail end of the American hurricane, which put Tam's transport plans to rest. But I've got this. A while ago, I touched base with Richard Cox of the Deep State Consciousness podcast, and he was particularly interested in episode 91 of this show, a presentation I did called The Psychology of Statism, and he gave me an opportunity to expand on some of those ideas, and that's something that's of great interest to me as well. It's a running theory, something I still mean to investigate further and learn more about and develop my ideas regarding. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did.
Hello and welcome to the Deep State Consciousness podcast. Today I'm joined by Antony Sammeroff. Antony is a psychologist and therapist and also the host of the Scottish Liberty podcast. Antony, hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Delighted to join you.
So we're going to focus on a presentation you gave, which really captivated me, and it brought the two halves of your expertise together, called the Psychology of the State.
I think it was called the Psychology of Statism.
Psychology of Statism, even better,
yeah.
Right. Where you looked at the underlying psychological factors that are going into people's relationship to attitude towards this thing we call the state. Okay.
Right.
You yourself are coming at that from a rather unusual position of someone who rejects the notion that the state is a benevolent entity, that it enhances our lives, and not that we could reform it and make it better, but if we got rid of it altogether, we wouldn't just survive, but we'd thrive under those circumstances. So basically, Antony, I'm saying you're an actor.
Yeah. Well, I'm an ideological anarchist, let's say. I don't believe that the state is a necessary institution. I don't know if anarchist is like the best term to describe it, because obviously people have certain preconceptions about the word anarchism, people throwing Molotov cocktails. And then, of course, the first people to claim the term anarchism were a brand of communists, of people in far left socialists, social anarchists. They believed in a social order without government or without capitalism. I'm not against commerce or business, so I don't necessarily know if I directly fall into that tradition. But essentially, I'm an advocate of a stateless society. I'm not saying that we should get rid of all governments tomorrow, because that's like assuming that if we burnt down all the churches, everyone would immediately become atheists. No, that's not how it works. People need to be able to organize socially. And also, people have bad examples of so-called anarchist societies like Somalia, which is not actually a anarchist society. It's a failed state. Well, it's like if you allow the state to have a monopoly on providing certain services, whether it's security, police, national defense, or we can go even further, healthcare and education, and the state collapses, obviously, because they had a monopoly over providing their services, there's no one else there to step in and fill the gap instantly. Incidentally, places in rural Somalia performed better after the state collapsed. It was places like the urban cities and things like that where they relied more on government that went so badly. So I know I've already been talking a lot, but I just make one more qualification, which is that in reality, there is no state. We already live in anarchy, actually. What there are is there's a whole bunch of individuals, and some of them call themselves a government. There only are individuals. There only are. Like, look around. Where can you point this? See if I showed you a satellite picture of the map, the globe. You wouldn't be able to point out where one country ends and the other begins. They're arbitrary lines. They're conceptual entities. States are intersubjective. We agree based on consensus that they exist. So how did this entity gain legitimacy? Well, one way is they hold elections. So you have a few people called the government, who call themselves the government, and they're the state. And then you have, say, public servants, people who work for that entity, whether it's that conceptual entity, whether it's in the civil service, the tax collectors, police, people in the military. Okay, there's a big difference between people who make a living in the so-called public sector and people who make a living in the private sector. If you work in the private sector, I need to go out and convince people to buy my services, whether that's as a wage job or whether I produce something and I sell it to people, right? If you work for this entity called the state, you defy those laws of economics and reciprocity. Your income is drawn at the point of a gun through the tax system. If you don't pay your taxes, you get a strongly worded letter. If you ignore the letter, you'll get a court summons. If you ignore the court summons, people will come to your house and try to drag you off. And if you resist them, they will shoot you and kill you. So if you don't pay your taxes, you will be put in a cage with murderers and rapists, right? That's the punishment. So this idea that in our day-to-day life, we have certain standards in which we interact as individuals. If you hit your friend or threaten them, or you steal from them, or you deceive them, you commit fraud, we call that antisocial. All of that behavior is considered antisocial. You would not define your friendships or your relationships based on your ability to aggress against other people, but you're mutually not aggressing each other. The same goes for the shopkeeper, right? You get on with each other socially in day-to-day life by not stealing from the shop. If you steal from the shop, then we have a problem. So then we have at the center of society, what we call society, this entity called the state, where everything's backwards. Okay, now coercion is the dish du jour. You know, it's immoral, we are told, for the state not to tax people, because then they can't, not to steal from people. They're meant to do it. So there's this strange inversion in people's perception of what is socially acceptable in their day-to-day life compared to what the government should and should not do. And I basically would say that if it's a principle, see if you can't get smacking people and stealing their stuff to work in your day-to-day life, like to create smooth interactions in day-to-day life. Why would we expect that putting coercion at the center of society as the organizing principle of society would result in good results? And of course, we've seen the effects that states can have: concentration camps, world wars, gulags. That's the least of it. There's much more subtle forms of coercion. I don't know the extent to which the state is responsible for slowing down the material prosperity of people. But that's an economic question which we can maybe delve into later if we have time.
Sure. Well, I'd love to. I'm going to resist the temptation to start asking you questions about what you've just said, because it's a wonderful, succinct definition and explanation of why you're an anarchist. And we could just talk about that. We could just explore that for the next hour. But I'm really keen to talk about the particular presentation, the psychology of statism. Before I do wonder if I can ask you to maybe give an example of an event in your own life, something you saw that led you in this direction. I'm assuming that you weren't always holding these views, and I think it may be helpful to people to relate from a personal example. Now, I'm aware if someone asked me to do that, I might be finding it difficult to give a concise
sure.
answer. But if any little example of something you saw that...
Okay, I'll just the brief story of status to anarchist. I guess I had, like, let's say, slightly left of center views, what we call in America now progressive. I had progressive views. I believed in a market economy, but I believed in cleaned up capitalism. You know, the state should regulate the economy and save us from the predations of capitalism, and we should have government mandated social safety net, universal health care, education, blah, blah, blah. But apart from that, I was for a market economy. Heavily regulated market economy. I started putting videos up on YouTube because I got into the same debates over and over again. I thought if I could put little presentations on YouTube presenting some of my arguments and political views, that I wouldn't have to have the same conversations again because I could just put that information out. This is about 2007. So shortly afterwards, all these libertarians, I don't know if your people at home are familiar with the term libertarian. It's kind of a political ideology which looks on the face of it so-called left-wing on foreign policy and on civil liberties. So they don't believe in the government snooping on you and things like that. And these used to be associated with the left. But on economics, they were so-called right-wing, or they're for capitalism, not socialism. So these free market capitalists gatecrashed my YouTube channel and sent me down kept on arguing with me and sent me down the rabbit hole of watching videos. And over the course, I wasn't an easy sell on anarchism. But once someone brought to me the attention of the non-aggression principle, which is the idea, right? You don't hit people, you don't take their stuff, you don't commit fraud, you don't bear false witness, or harm other people by telling falsehoods about them, so to speak. That's not the same as not being able to lie. So that's you don't aggress against anyone. When people brought that to my attention, okay, that does make sense. That is a principle. That is how we live ethically day to day. We do adhere to the non-aggression principle in our day-to-day relationships. Then it wasn't enough to convert me because I thought, well, yeah, that might be true, but the alternative might be worse. I mean, if it really is children starving to death on the street without the government, then maybe that coercion is better. Maybe a little bit of coercion is better than none. So I took a couple of years I needed to have my own curiosity satisfied to the extent that anarchy would not lead to worse predations. And once it was, I ran out of excuses, and I had to embrace the idea that what is rational and consistent is going to lead to corrupt means cannot result in good ends. Sometimes people think the ends justify the means. But your means become your ends. That's why every communist revolution ends up in people starving, gulags. Like, you have to kill people. You have to kill people who don't want to go along with your utopian idea. And it always results in chaos. You should never, and this is what I mean. I believe that the universe behaves on principles. You know, the universe adheres to the laws of logic. You know, something very simple that the economist Adam Smith said is, we don't get bread out of the benevolence of the baker, it's out of his self-interest, right? So he sells you bread because he's self-interested. From that we can but it's mutually beneficial. If I swap you a pen for a tie, we're better off because you prefer the pen and I prefer the tie. Otherwise, we wouldn't be swapping. So I know I've been talking for a long time, but once I understood the principle that there is such a thing as a voluntary transaction between individuals that benefits both individuals, that's not exploitative. So once you realize that exists, you go, okay, well, obviously, if you choose corrupt means, if you choose coercion, then you are going to have less good results than if you just say, no, we don't use coercion unless someone initiates force. If someone initiates force, we can use coercion to subdue them, you know, in self-defense, but we don't initiate the use of force.
Sure.
Yeah.
So That's a great response. And I think there's a couple of things that intrigue me. One is this idea that when you say you believe the universe works on principles and the ends don't justify the means become the ends. That's an interesting, that there's a kind of almost deeper philosophical position about the nature of the universe that this is coming out of. But I want to put that thought on ice for a moment.
That's fine.
And maybe we can go to it rather than start with it. So the rest of what you said, it all sounds very sensible to me, Anthony. Like, you had one position, you were talking about it. These people came along and said, no, you've got it all wrong. You need to look at this. You looked at it and you took your time. You were cautious. You said, yeah, but what about this? And over time, you said, you know what, they're right. I'm going to go with that. If only the world worked that way, you wouldn't have had to have made a video called The Psychology of Statism. Because when we look out into the world, if it was that rational, YouTube would be full of videos of people on the political left and the political right sitting down and having rational, reflective discussions about the minimum wage, socialized whatever, and coming to an agreement. That's not what YouTube is full of. YouTube is full of videos ranting angrily at each other for people of different positions, waving placards, trying their best to find ways to produce the most devastating insult to the other side. And I think if an alien spaceship came along and observed this from a distance, their report they would send back to the home planet would be that clearly the human beings are acting out some kind of deeper psychological angst in their political discussions. That they're not objective. And that's where your presentation comes in. So what are your thoughts on that? Given the heat and the anger and the division around political conversations, where do you think that's coming from?
Okay, there's so many ways to tackle this question. The first thing I would say is everyone's first experience of authority is the parents. And I was really very much this was brought to my attention by the very successful YouTuber Stefan Molyneux when I got into his work, which, by the way, I preferred many years back because now he very much focuses on news and things like that. I found his more philosophical or deeper psychological.
The career trajectory of Stefan Molyneux is another podcast all in itself.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, back in those days, he for example talked about the application of the non-aggression principle to children, like not smacking your kids, for example, which is just the start. But okay, he brought to my attention the work of a psychologist called Lloyd DeMoss, who wrote a couple of books called The Emotional Life of Nations and The Origins of War and Child Abuse. And he went through history. He created a field called psychohistory, which is psychology as applied to history, and showed how the parenting styles that were prevalent in certain times affected the kind of governments that people had. So before fascism came to power in Italy and Germany, there was a period of particularly horrendous authoritarian parenting in both those. So that's one level of it, the projection of the parents onto the state. And also gods. So if you look, say, in India, where they had a very family-orientated society, where you had an extended family, their gods were a pantheon. They had many gods. That would be a child's first experience of authority. Many gods, right? Uncles, aunties, mums, dads, all living together in the one house. When you look at the Old Testament and the time that the Old Testament was created, the parenting styles would have been very authoritarian, and you have an authoritarian God. And around the time of Jesus, you have a more benevolent kind of God. But you know, Jesus says, I sacrificed everything for you. I sacrificed so much for you my whole life. Now that sounds kind of like the kind of thing a parent would say, you know, especially maybe around that time of the governments and the religions that spawn on the earth appear to, according to Lloyd DeMoss's work, reflect the parenting styles that are prevalent at the time. And as you've seen, Western civilization progressed. In the 20th century, we had parents start saying to their kids, what do you want to do with your life? That was unheard of before the 20th century. That's very, very recent parenting style. Before that, your parents bloody well tell you what to do. So, that's the first element. That was the first thing that put me on the scent, which led me down. This is years ago. So that presentation has been literally years in the making. Now, to bring it up to speed, I'm a psychologist, I'm a therapist, right? And I've studied trauma, the effects of trauma on the human psyche. And I can talk a lot or a little about that, but the short version is when a human being experiences a trauma, their brain reacts, but it doesn't unreact. And you need to consciously work on yourself to unreact your traumas. So there's various modalities that can help somatic experiencing, EMDR, trauma therapy, etc. If you want to hear more about that, I guess you can check out. You can get in touch with me. We don't have all the time in the world. So what happens when you experience a trauma? We've all heard of the fight or flight response. Now it's more often said the fight, flight, or freeze response, and sometimes even the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. What does fawn mean? That means sucking up to people, basically, to get out of trouble. So the brain is designed first and foremost. The brain wants you to survive. It doesn't care about your quality of life. It wants you to survive first and foremost. So if you have a traumatic experience, you react and the brain goes, well, that's how I survived that experience, so I'm going to keep that as a pattern. Even things like tics are often, or maybe always, the product of a trauma where actually someone's reacting to a stimulus that's no longer present. Do you understand the fight or flight response? Supposing the way that you got out various traumas when you were growing up was to go into a fight response. You then learn that the way you deal with stressful situations is to get aggressive. That's how you get people away from you. Or the flight response, you just bail. You just get the hell out of here. Or more often, I think very, very prevalent, is the freeze response, where people just don't know what to do when they're under pressure and they just completely freeze. So then that becomes the tendency of your personality. That becomes how you deal with stressful situations. So I would say when you're talking about these placards and arguments on the internet, what you're basically seeing is people's fight response. They're not actually in a situation where their life is threatened, but they have an accumulation of undischarged tensions from ever since they were a child. Every time they felt threatened, they wound up, but they didn't wind down afterwards. And if you look in nature, after animals suffer a trauma, they discharge that. They flail their limbs, basically. They start flailing. Now, if you've ever seen someone have a panic attack, they start to tremor. And what do people usually do? They go, it's okay, there's no need to shake. They stop them from tremoring. That's biologically wrong. What you're getting them to do is repress the body's natural ability to discharge stress from the system. So this is everywhere. Everyone needs to get into trauma release exercises. You can look them up on YouTube and find ways to start discharging, because people aren't literate about this.
Okay, so we'll come to what people can maybe do about it in a minute. Yeah. I'm just keen to get your thoughts on how the problem is visibly manifesting. So maybe it's too simple, but I'm going to put people into like two categories.
Yeah, well, that's what I did in the.
That's what I'm getting it from. But you can see it like in the UK, it manifests as maybe in a big way over the Brexit debate.
That's a good example. Okay. Yeah.
Which, given the level of response people have had to that, it's clear that Brexit, or being in or out of the European Union, means more to people than just, are we getting a better trade deal? That's what they'll talk about. But clearly, when I talk to people about why they wanted to remain in Europe, it's tied up with a whole vision of the future and coming together as one world and working together and not having these horrible walls and boundaries and regressing into this. And you look at that on so many levels. And you see it also, obviously, of the Trump phenomenon then in the United States. It seems to divide people down the middle. And you can see that if people are pro-Remain, they're probably going to be concerned about global warming. Okay, whereas I would say someone who wants to leave the EU, statistically, more chance not.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah,
why
and
would that
they're
be?
concerned about immigration. Yes, because there's two distinct personality structures coming out there, and I guess my kind of analysis is the right, what we call the right, the political right. I know it's too broad a term. I think the right-left divide is not as useful as it's not useless. It does have its uses, but it can be deceptive. The political right are those who are more kind of, they've got the more of the fight response, and the left have got more of the flight response, which is the, oh no, we need to like love and appreciate everyone, and like we would rather it's always our fault, like everything in the world that's ever gone wrong is the fault of Western civilization. It's more passive, like, whereas the right are more aggressive, and it's like it's their fault. It's their fault. Like, it's the immigrants, it's the Muslims, and also, do you know what? Both have, the thing is, both tend to be correct in what they affirm and wrong in what they deny. So, for example, the left think that the only problem with Islam is that we've bombed their countries, which is just completely ahistorical. Or you've not actually read the documents and what Islam actually says. Do you know what I mean? What Muhammad's life was like. It's a bad set of ideas, Islam. It's got a whole totalitarian political philosophy baked into it, whereas the right seem to deny the fact that us going to other countries and blowing people up isn't going to result in blowback, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, one event in America, 9/11, led us into war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So how pissed off do you think those people are, and how hateful do you think they feel when you kill them? So they both have these blind spots. I want to bring up Donald Trump because he is, as you say, the perfect example. And if you try and find out what the left actually don't like about him policy-wise, they just tend to make shit up, right? Or they pull certain quotes that they think paint him in a light that fundamentally they hate his character. It's down that divide, which is they just think he's uncouth. That fundamentally, that's the reason they don't like him. They think he's uncouth. He's too boisterous. He's too arrogant. He's got too much swagger. Whereas that's exactly why the right like him. He's got Trump. Some of Trump's policies are completely patently ridiculous, and he's gone back on so many of his campaign positions. He was meant to be an anti-establishment figure, but he's filled his cabinet with establishment figures. So there's plenty to criticize him for, but those who love him think he can do no wrong. And of course, the truth is, he's not as bad as he's not bad for the reasons which his critics think they are.
Well, I think another way of looking at that, Antony, might be to say that his predecessors were just as bad, but didn't get that level of criticism. So Barack Obama used drone bombs to separate children from their family. Okay, that's a more permanent way of doing it. Didn't really get much criticism for it compared to what Trump's got.
His policy, Obama's policies starved the people of Yemen to death, but we didn't hear anything from the left. He bombed 7 Muslim countries. Where did the anti-war movement go? At least under Bush, people had something at stake. Like bands like the Dixie Chicks, who criticized Bush for the war on terror, got blocked from the radio. Now you've got these so-called subversive lefties. Oh, you're so brave taking an anti-Trump position on TV. Oh, that's so brave of you. Bravo. Do you know what? Stand-up comedians. Low-hanging fruit. It's all virtue. It's all preaching to the choir. So, and they think they're radical when actually their position is one of the 2 mainstream positions. That's the ridiculous thing. So what's going on here? It's about personality structure more than anything else. The left want to say, like, let's let everyone in, live and let live. Like, we should be able to sacrifice for other people. And the right are saying, no, we need a strong border. We need to be able to separate. And there is, like, this is the thing I think people don't understand. Like conservative-minded people, they can't just come out and say, well, you know what? We like to be around people who are like us. Because people will go, that's racist. And in a way, it kind of is racist, but they want to say, why can't you stop making us wrong? Like, it's none of your business if we want to just be around people like us. We don't like going out the house and hearing people speaking all sorts of different languages that we don't understand, or we want to be around people like us. And you want to force multiculturalism onto us when we're just not comfortable with it. And obviously the left wing response is, well, that's racist. And the thing is, I don't think conservative people tend to be very articulate. I mean, you've got Ben Shapiro, I suppose, but he'd never come out and say, he's very articulate, but he'd never come out and say, do you know what the thing is with us conservatives? We just like to be around people like us, and we're sick of being called racist or being made wrong for that. It's not like we hate other races. They can do their own thing in their own countries. Can you imagine someone getting up on TV and saying that? But they just don't want to be wrong. It's like, it's got a libertarian thing to it, because they say, if you guys want to be around people who are not like you go and do it. We don't want to see our culture change. We're comfortable with our culture. It feels familiar to us. And you can see a sort of psychology of that. You know, it might be too narrow. They might be too insecure. But there has to be a line somewhere. You know, there has to be a more reasonable position than these two extreme positions of, like, let's make the wall impermeable and not let anyone else in and stay exactly the same. Although some would argue that it's worked for Japan. And on the left side, like, you know, okay, make it a free-for-all. Why? Because see, if people come here, they get free schools, they get free healthcare, they get welfare, they might get a flat. That means that immigrants get to loot the native population for resources through the tax system. So there needs to be some kind of compromise. Either you get rid of the welfare state and you have no welfare and no benefits for immigrants until they've paid into the system, and then you can maybe have open borders, or you close the borders and you need to institute integration policies, because there's no integration policy.
Well, do you know what I mean? There's this fight over one center of power, right? So you have these just two distinctly different groups of people and one center of power, and whoever gets to control it.
That's right. That's well put. You have it's the war of all against all. You have half the population trying to put their way of life, which is no abortions, strict no controls on guns. It's more free market economy, etc., etc. They're trying to impose their foreign interventionism, surveillance state, etc. Authority. The right love authority. Who knows why they love authority so much, but they love it. You can't burn the flag. That should be a jailable offence, right? They want to impose that upon people who want to impose something else on them, which is to say, you have to marry gays in your church, even if you don't want to. You have to be inclusive. You have to employ a certain number of minorities. You have to. One side is trying to impose their have-tos on the other. You have to pay for the poor.
Sure, and it strikes me as that in any other walk of life, the solution would be obvious. Like, let's say you and I were flatmates, okay?
Yeah.
And you like to play your music very loud into the night, and I like to read a book and go to bed at 9 o'clock, okay? Yeah. At some point, we will probably agree that we are not suitable people to share a flat, and we'd come to some arrangement, one of us to stay, or whatever. But this is an unthinkable thought in terms of the state. People don't think, well, maybe we're just not wanting to be governed under the same structure and we should secede in some way. Or
the left really oppose federalism in America, which is the states, because it's not good enough that we have the right to abortion in blue states. The red states have to accept our way of life. Now, I mean, it doesn't really matter my position on this issue. I'm just saying that it's not enough for some people that we live this way. Everyone has to live this way. Now, if we go to a restaurant, you, me, and a few other friends, we all get to pick our own meal. That's why I love the free market. Okay, everyone gets to pick what we want. We don't have to go, well, let's take a vote. Who wants curry and who wants pizza? Well, if it's 5-4, all 9 of us have to have pizza. And that's what the political system is about. And that's why it will never work. And the bigger the political structure is, the more the political structure is the war of all against all. So we should try as best we can. I mean, I would like to see a world where we are devolving the center of political power down to the individual. And the principles are: you don't hit people, you don't take their stuff, you don't commit fraud, you don't harm people by bearing false witness. And, you know, maybe another couple, you don't harm another person in their person or their property. If you can, in other words, it's the old principle, which is do what you want as long as you don't harm anyone else.
So let's move on to talking about the solutions you touched on with trauma, okay? But just to qualify before we do that, I just want to I don't think what you're saying or either of us saying is that anyone who has any belief in the nation state in some way is coming from a psychologically unbalanced place, because you know as well as I do that growing up in the British Isles, the state sea that everyone swims in, and just you can go your whole life and never even occurs to you to question that. Where I think things become a problem is when we notice being presented with ideas that aren't our own, if we're having a very emotional reaction to that, and rather than having an ability to reflect upon these ideas and go, that's interesting, let me think about that, let me try and understand your position better. Now the criticisms I would have of this, and working from the way you described your own, there's this absolute shutdown to the other, whether it's taking on the ideas of the opposite political pole, or whether it's the idea of these nation states shouldn't exist in the way they do, whatever it is. So
people feel their identity is threatened. And I just add to that, but bear in mind, people go through 11 to 13 years of mandatory education where they learn about how it was all horrible until the state came along and fixed it. If the schools were run by McDonald's, not many people would be eating Burger King. I'm sure they'd have all these stories about how Burger King did all the most horrible things all through history. And I would just add to that, states did not arrive, there's this idea that people got together at some point and said, let's make a government to solve our disputes. That's not how it happened. Government arose at the same time as slavery arose. Before the invention of agriculture, no individual could gain more food than it took to sustain themselves. You know, we lived a subsistence lifestyle. We went out and caught animals and foraged for berries and things like that in groups, and we shared the spoils. When we learned how agriculture, one person could produce more food than they needed. And that led to commerce, that led to exchange. But it also led to slavery, because now I can enslave someone because they can produce more than they eat, and I can steal. And it also led to states, to nation states, because the government now had something to tax. So the first governments were people who said they were either the embodiment of gods on the earth or representative of gods. Government and religion was very, very tied together right up until the 18th century and the Enlightenment. The church played the role of giving legitimacy to the monarchs and the states. And then nowadays, the university professors play the same role as the court intellectuals did in the past, where they come up with these wacky harebrained theories like the social contract, which you've never even heard of. You can never read it, you can sign it, but apparently just for being born, you're subject to. There's never been such a contract that is considered valid, but they come up with all these justifications for the state. Oh, if it wasn't for the state, children would be going up chimneys. Well, actually, child labor was something like 95% abolished in this country before there was any laws against in the Industrial Revolution, the capitalists exploited workers. Never mind the fact that throughout the entirety of the Industrial Revolution, the living standards for the people at the bottom was increasing at a rate unprecedented in all of history. And it was capitalism that actually ended poverty. through the capital investment, creating machines that allowed one person. So we could go on and on and on and on.
And just to clarify, you're not saying that there's no form of what I could call governance could be helpful. Like if you live in an apartment block, you might have a committee that designates how you take care of the communal areas. But the point is you've chosen to live
voluntary.
As opposed to something imposed from the top down.
Yeah, it's created from the bottom up instead of the top down. You and I figure out something that works, and if it works well, we include more people in it. And if other people see that working well, that spreads out through society like a meme. I've got a really great presentation, if you don't mind me bigging it up, called Why Markets Work, Public versus Private, where I talk about the different incentive structures that voluntary institutions versus state institutions have. So the great thing with the bottom-up approach is every idea gets tested on the small scale, and if it works for some people, it's more widely adopted. Whereas the government approach is we need to use our brains to anticipate what we think is going to work, and we impose it on the entire society. And if it doesn't work, oh well, we just need to come up with something else. It's a very, very risky way of running anything. So basically, I can't remember what your original question was, but I just wanted to point out that states weren't arrived at organically. The latest justification for states is, oh well, we vote, we are all the state. We are all the state. Well, that's not how states were originally created. That's just the latest way of legitimating the use of force. So, what was your question?
Well, the question, perhaps you can comment, because these points are so fascinating that you could make up. But I'd like you to speak to trauma, okay? Because another thing I find exciting about our period in history is not only can we get access to all these political, economic, scientific, and on and on and on ideas through the internet, it's perhaps the first time in history, being a human being has been quite a traumatic thing throughout history. Children die in childbirth, there are wars going on, famine, slavery, all sorts. And we have, and let's hope it continues, emerged out of that to some degree, at least in some parts of the world. We can now go, let's look at that. So with regard to the kind of inability to reflect on different ideas that trauma might create, what can people do about that?
People feel the reason why you see people reacting and becoming doxastically closed, which is they can't accept new ideas, is because they feel like their identity itself is threatened when their ideas is threatened. And I would argue maybe some of that is biological, maybe some of it's genetic, but I would say that an overactive fight or flight response created by previous traumas would only reinforce the feeling that one is at risk when their ideas are at risk. So it could be possible that if we had a trauma-literate society and it was the norm for people to be rehabilitated from trauma psychologically, which, by the way, animals do in nature. They discharge a trauma response. If humans did that, then it's very possible that people would be a lot more open-minded and they'd be a lot more functional. So what can people do? Okay. The first thing is to understand trauma. I've got some episodes of the Be Yourself and Love It podcast on that. There's some good books. One is called, you check out a guy called Robert Scaer, S-C-A-E-R, Bob Scaer. He's got some great presentations on YouTube. Get educated, understand what trauma is. Then there's various modalities that are designed to help discharge the the trauma response from the body. Somatic experiencing, EMDR, trauma release exercises, bioenergetics, anything that involves not just the mind, but the physical body as well. And there's one or two more. I mentioned bioenergetics or something else. That's enough to start with. That's enough to start with. Check out these, see if there's a practitioner in your area. Try something out, find out if it works for you. And if you feel yourself getting better, then I guess this ties into my personal individualist philosophy, which is I don't think that political action is the best way to change the world. I think the best way to change the world is bring yourself to your maximum potential, become skilled, talented, get in good mental health, become happy, get good relationships, be competent, and create a change in your local environment which other people can copy. So to that effect, by the way, I wrote a short book called Procrastination Annihilation to help people become more productive.
Is this the book that's about to come out? Or is
no, this is my previous book. This has already been released. The reason I mention it is people can download it for free from beyourselfandloveit.com/do it. And that's my free book on helping you overcome procrastination. The good thing is, if you get the book, links to all of my other media, my self-help podcast, my political podcast, everything are in that book, that ebook, that free ebook. So if people want to keep in touch with my work or find out my other links, just download the free book from beyourselfandloveit.com/do it.
I have one more adjunct question on the trauma thing, and then we'll move in towards the end. So you've talked there about how I might address my own trauma, and how I might increase my own capacity to not have that reactive response to different ideas. But also I go out into the world, I go to friends' houses, I talk on Facebook, and I meet people who I put forward a rational case for this is why we should do this with whatever, minimum wage, whatever it is, and I get what I can spot is not a rational but a reactive response back. And where I think this takes dialogue in general is I get a reactive response, so I respond with a reactive response, and you get arguments erupting. And there seems to be, this can be a bit of an addictive thing. People can quite like the winning of arguments, or to walk away feeling, well, I was clearly right, that fool over there. How do you have any insight on how people can approach when they feel they're getting a reactive response that isn't just going to increase, but going to deactivate that?
Yeah. Great question. There are some things that you can do to reliably create better exchanges of ideas. And the idea is to, instead of see what happens when you take an oppositional approach is people dig their feet in, because it becomes me versus you. Now, if you can change the dynamic to be me and you trying to share information and work this out, you've got a much better chance of getting through to people. And you might learn too. So the first thing to do, I've got two specific tools that really help. You need to slow down. See if someone states a position that you disagree with. Instead of launching into a monologue of all the ways they're wrong and the reason and evidence, first thing is you can ask, how did you reach that conclusion? Like, how did you come to that position? In a non-confrontational way. Oh, how did you reach that conclusion? So, and let them, you might want to interrupt, but just let them explain how they arrived at their position. The second technique is to paraphrase what you think their position is in your own words. Try and put their position better than they put it. So am I right in thinking that you believe X, Y, Z? And they will say, they will either go, yeah, or they will say, not quite that, but, or they will say, and also. Let them articulate their position and listen to them like you care, like you really want to understand. Make sure just you demonstrating that you understand their position will make them more open to what you have to say and less confrontational. So what you would say back then is, oh, I have different information, or the way I see it, or I understand differently, or have you heard of this, and you present what you've learned, not as a contradiction, but as more information. Now, I'm not saying that I'm impeccable and that I always do it this way, but if you want to do it well, then this is the diplomatic way to do it. In fact, I've got an article on the site Waking Times. You can just type in how to change someone's mind into Google and Waking Times, or Antony Sammeroff. Yeah. So loads of links in the description of this one, I fear. But yeah, this is the thing. People want quick 3-minute YouTube videos and they want to understand the world. The thing is, this short attention span, you can't really fully understand any issue without seeing it from many perspectives. And that's why I like doing presentations like the Psychology of Statism or the Why Markets Work, Public versus Private, because they gave me an extended period of time to look at one issue from many angles with many evidences and arguments. And your time in those presentations, if you people watching at home would like to listen to them, will not be wasted. They will give you a thorough understanding that took me, over a decade to reach. It's a shortcut. It's not a long time to invest in really understanding something.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Anthony. As a final point, I know you're just about to release a new book, or it just has come out. Do you want to just finish us off by talking?
Yeah, I've got another book coming out called Universal Basic Income For and Against, and people might have heard of the Universal Basic Income. What I do in that book is I go through, first of all, some of the arguments for, just like I was telling you on how to change someone's mind. Then I go through the arguments against, or I explain why I think some of those for arguments aren't 100%. And then I have a whole section on the book, my favorite section, which is on how we can improve. I think people who are in favor of the UBI want it because they think it will help people on low incomes or at the bottom of the economic ladder. So I go through a whole bunch of policies that could be implemented that would specifically help the people at the bottom of the economic ladder, but would involve less coercion rather than less government, less state power rather than more. And that's what I gave a nod to earlier on in our talk when I said I don't know the extent to which the government has hampered the growth in people's living standards, but I go through things like government policies on housing, which have put our rents and our mortgages through the roof. The price of houses in the UK went up over 4,000% between 1971 and 2011, and I demonstrate how that was due to government policies. Imagine we all needed to only pay a fifth of the rent. How much richer would we all be? I talk about and I talk about various other policies like that, ways that realistic policies that in the real world would help everyone, include especially the poor. So I think, look out for that book. Maybe when it comes out, you'll have me back on your show.
Absolutely. I'd love to have you back on for that. I know you've done some excellent writing on applying these ideas to the healthcare system and where it's functional, what could be done about that. Would love to talk about that and a host of other things too. So it'd be great to have you back on. But just let me know, when is that book out? Is that out?
I've not decided whether I'm going to release it in August or September.
Okay.
I'm very busy in August. I could put it out next month, but I'm really busy and I know I'll need to plug it like hell. So I might just wait and put it out on the 1st of September. But it will be available on Amazon Kindle and that. And other might get a print copy as well. I've not found out the details yet.
Okay, great. We'll stay in touch with Anthony or sign up to my mailing list, and I'll put a reminder around when it comes out. Thank you very much for today, and we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Just one more plug. Please just, if you're interested in anything I say, just go to beyourselfandloveit.com/do-it and download my free book, Procrastination Annihilation. It will help you overcome your blocks to achieving your goals. And also it's got links to all my other work in it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.